Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for a virtual event tonight with Dr. Joan Steidinger in conversation with Dr. Alpha Alexander, who are here to discuss Stand Up and Shout, Women's Fight for Equal Pay, Equal Rights, and Equal Opportunities in Sports. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is Tuesday, September 29th at 6 p.m. with Shani Mutu in conversation with Julie Enzer. They'll be discussing the book Polar Vortex. For regular updates on upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our email newsletter, which you can do on our website. To submit a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like our speakers to answer, please click the like button. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask a question. Also, support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. To do that, just click on the green focus button directly below the viewer screen. I'm having some technical issues. Okay. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue to connect with your checkout process. We're selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro FM and Kobo for those who are interested. A little more about Joan. Joan is a licensed psychologist, an Association of Applied Sports Psychology certified consultant, and a member of the United States Olympic Committee's Registry of Sports Psychology. She has written columns for psychologytoday.com and sfgate.com. She's worked as a sports psychologist for close to 30 years with offices in Mill Valley and San Francisco. And a little more about Alpha. Alpha is the co-founder of the Black Women in Sports Foundation. She earned her master's degree in 1978 and a doctorate degree in 1981 at Temple University in Pennsylvania. She was the assistant women's athletic director while there from 1980 to 1983 and the women's athletic director from 1981 to 1983. She went on to work at the Women's Sports Foundation. And in 1986, she worked at the WCA of San Francisco and served as health and wellness director until 1987, where she became the sports advocate for WCA and USA National Office. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Joan and Alpha. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Well, Alpha, I'm so happy. Sorry, my
multiple windows open.
It's going weird with my volume. Sorry.
If you have multiple windows,
I hope you can hear me clearly because I can't hear me. I'm honored to have Alpha and I together being able to discuss these issues. I wanted to read some excerpts from my book for you.
Joan,
yeah,
we're having some issues with your audio. If either of you could please close all of the windows on your browser except for the one you're talking on now. So if you have open tabs, please close them or open.
No, I don't.
Okay. I think it's coming from Joan.
I had one open, I closed it. Oh, there's another one. Sorry. Okay, now everything's closed.
You're good. You're good.
Okay. So to continue with introducing Alpha, I'm going to start with some excerpts from my book. And the first one is going to be about Alpha herself.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Dr. Alpha Alexander holds an incredible list of accomplishments herself. Yet, it's hard to find much information about her online. Her career began in 1972 when she played basketball and volleyball at Worcester College in Ohio. This was the year that Title IX passed. After that, she went on to get her MA and PhD in physical education at Temple University in Philadelphia, where she became a graduate assistant in the women's athletics department, a role she kept for 4 years. Next, she served as an assistant director of athletics and acting women's athletic director from 1981 to 1983. Director of Health and Sports Advocacy for YWCA USA, and for over a decade, she was on the USOC's board of directors. Named one of the 30 most significant professionals in the business of sports by Black Enterprise in 1995, Dr. Alexander has won numerous awards for her service, notably the Billie Jean King Contribution Award and the Olympic Shield Award. Throughout her life, she has inspired and served as a role model and mentor to women of color and others. And I thank you so much for being here, Alpha.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. She's been a leader in sports for years, and we don't hear enough about folks in the African American community because there's some very powerful women who have been leaders in sports, and Alpha is certainly one of them. The major hurdle female leaders in sport face in overcoming inequality is getting everyone to listen to their voices and ideas about attaining greater equality for female athletes. In fact, when women do speak up, they are often immediately attacked and reminded of how much men have done for women. In response to McGraw, who was a coach of Notre Dame, a female, stating that she would only hire women going forward, the coach for her rival team, the University of Connecticut, Gino Ariyama, responded as such, saying, "Well, I hope she sends a thank you to all those guys that used to be on her staff that got all those good players that won a championship." With gender discrimination oozing out of this statement, McGraw's Fighting Irish went on to defeat the Connecticut Huskies, Ariyama's team, in the women's Final Four in 2019. As one researcher aptly stated, despite increased participation for girls and women in sport, they are underrepresented in leadership positions at all levels of sport. Nancy Hogshead-Mayer, a four-time Olympic medalist, has labeled the struggle Sexism 101. Now I'm going to read you a quote from Sonia Sotomayor, and I think it's important it's in my book for all women to hear this. Don't let fear stop you. Don't give up because you are paralyzed by inner insecurity or overwhelmed by the odds. Because in giving up, you give up hope. Understand that failure is a process in life. Not only in trying can you enrich yourself and have the possibility of moving forward. The greatest obstacle in life is fear and giving up because of it. In a conversation I had with Dr. Dave Barry, a sports economist, he talked about how the media seems to take delight in discussing the most negative aspects of women's sports. The complexity of the economics of women's sports cannot be easily explained, as was the case with men's sports fans, a base that took decades to build. The WNBA was building consistently until recently. Part of that building process involves promotion and easy access to women's sports. However, a lack of marketing and promotion has stifled this process, although currently with the WNBA supporting Black Lives Matter, they're getting a lot more visibility that they deserve. I just added that. Laura Gentile, the primary founder of ESPNW and senior vice president of marketing for ESPN, believes people must begin to believe and acknowledge that sport is both a girl's thing and a boy's thing. Gentile suggests that we need to encourage female athletes.
Joan?
Yeah?
Joan, I'm sorry, we're having trouble seeing you.
Oh, I don't know what to say. I
Can
see
you
me.
lean? Oh, that's you. Okay. It's okay. Continue. I think the problem might right itself in a second.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Okay, I'll start with Laura Gentile, the primary founder of ESPNW and senior vice president of marketing for ESPN, believes people must begin to believe and acknowledge that sport is both a girl's thing and a boy's thing. In addition, Gentile suggests we need to encourage female athletes to be more colorful and express their honest opinions to the public more consistently. This is a positive and helpful way to draw attention to various women's sports. Now, I'd like to read about Nancy Hogshead-Maker, who, like Alpha helped me find so many people to interview. Nancy did the same as well. Nancy Hogshead-Maker, a 3-time Olympic gold medalist, an expert on Title IX, and an attorney, is a leading advocate for women in sports, now particularly harassed, assaulted, and sexually abused female athletes. She says she only started receiving calls for legal advice regarding sexual abuse in the sporting community in 2010, despite the fact that abuses had been ongoing for years. Unfortunately, Hogshead-Maker could relate all too well, having been raped herself as a college student at Duke University. Okay. Black and brown female athletes have rarely experienced equal treatment under Title IX. This legislation moved toward improving gender circumstances, but not racial equality in women's sports. Dr. Delia Douglas of the University of British Columbia has labeled the bias faced by Black women in sport as anti-Black racism in a gender-specific form. Even today, African-American females often suffer verbal and written abuse, as indicated by a previous study. Specifically, Serena Williams' detractors have called her a variety of offensive terms. She's heard herself described as a gorilla, manly, animalistic, and the N-word, and numerous other derogatory terms. In 2014, a ranking Russian tennis official called Serena and Venus the Williams brothers. After Serena was given a questionable foul that could have been a warning in the 2018 US Open championship match, several well-known former competitive tennis women, specifically Marit Carrillo and Martina Navratilova, spoke in opposition to her. In Carrillo's case, she said, "Williams occasionally acts like a bully." Navratilova, meanwhile, gave the benefit of the doubt to Ramos, the official, rather than Serena, on a call that commonly merits only a warning rather than a penalty. Williams, in a moment of obvious frustration, had called the ref a thief. Come on. Following the incident, it was revealed that Billie Jean King tweeted, "When a woman is emotional, she's hysterical, and she's penalized for it. When a man does the same, he's outspoken, and there are no repercussions." This is a perfect example of gender and racial discrimination. Right. At the end of each chapter, I have action steps toward greater gender and global equality. And in my global challenge chapter, I have such thing as supporting women's programs and developing and encouraging female sport participation, since it empowers girls and women to be a presence in the world at large. Increase the number of U.S. female sports leaders going to international conferences to exchange information. I learned so much, and my eyes were so further opened when I attended the International Working Group in Women in Sports Conference in Botswana 2 years ago. 4 more organizations in second and third world countries for the participation of girls in specific sports. Work directly with media channels to increase the levels of conversation and coverage of women's sports. And finally, I want to end with talking about a little more globally about women's sports. These are all excerpts from the book. On the global stage, we realize the difficulty of sport across nations. In some countries, for example, Zambia, the major sports organization for young women, is also working to prevent child brides and convince these women to get educated. The idealization of male athletes in such countries as Brazil provides the backdrop for regarding female athletes as second-rate, with little to no attention paid to them. In the Middle East, the level of women's participation in sport can be quite limited. Due to the attitudes of countries whose need to control women is vast. But the 2018 Global Gender Report describes equality for women based on economic opportunities, political empowerment, education, health, and survival. This report is all important as it provides an overview of how equality for women is progressing. The 10 worst countries are obvious: Yemen, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, many of the Middle Eastern countries. On the other hand, the 10 best countries include Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Nicaragua, Rwanda, New Zealand, the Philippines, Ireland, and Namibia. Of note, the United States didn't even make the top 50. Finally, I want to offer one more quote by Jackie Joyner Kersee, an African-American woman who competed in 4 Olympics and won 6 medals. The glory of sport comes from dedication, determination, and desire. Achieving success and personal glory in athletics has less to do with wins and losses than it does with learning how to prepare yourself so that at the end of the day, whether on the track or in the office, you know that there was nothing more you could have done to reach your ultimate goal. And that's all the excerpts I'm going to read you today. And hopefully we'll now have some conversation between Alpha and I. So Alpha, what did you think of some of the excerpts that I read?
It was funny because you talked about Nancy, and she actually was an intern of mine. And I am so proud of how she has developed over the years, based on her experience. When she came as an intern to me, she had just won a couple of gold medals in the Olympic Games, and people all over the country were asking her to speak. But with her responsibilities at the Women's Sports Foundation, I was very glad to get a chance to meet her. And then we have been friends since all those years after.
Oh wow.
Great. And to look back on today's conversation, what's happening in the world right now, if you think, I think about Tina Salone Green, Nikki Frank, Linda Green, and myself, and the coordination and formulation of the Black Women's Sports Foundation was so significant then, and was really, really needed, and still is needed today.
Yes.
Just my other reaction is I'm so proud of the WNBA and the NBA and the tennis players that have stepped up to the plate to say Breonna Taylor's name, say her name. I thought initially that in some of this movement, Black women or women of color were not being uplifted in this racial justice question. And now I think clearly it has stepped up on the platform and is a part of the conversation. People recognize that.
Yeah. Yeah, the conversations have been amazing across the country. And the sports figures are stepping up in such a way. And, the one thing I have to say bothered me is when they initially, like when I had with one of my classes at San Jose State, had a discussion about players stepping up in sports in the supporting Black Lives Matter, that the media wasn't even mentioning the WNBA, and they're in there the whole time. They didn't mention the women's equity that the soccer, our U.S. soccer team has been there fighting for women's equity. And I'm just so happy that teams are stepping up now. And as the women's soccer league now, they've come out wearing shirts, Black Lives Matter. They've come out supporting people of color. It's so important because we're really, quite frankly, in my opinion, we're all equal. And any difference people try to make, just to me, doesn't make any sense, and it never has. So that's why I wanted to write this book and mix it up in terms of, because even in my chapter where I discuss African American women, I also talk a little bit about Asian and Latino women, because they've all been neglected in terms of their contributions. Or the other thing is, I think that's interesting, Alpha, is they've also been slotted, like the African Americans, men and women, but particularly women, were slotted only into basketball and track and field. And one of the beautiful things that the Black Women's Sports Foundation is doing is, since Tina's was really involved in a critical figure in lacrosse, is they're teaching those kids other sports that aren't traditionally quote unquote accepted types of sports. And I think that's really an incredible thing.
Yes, Serena and Venus blew that apart in tennis. Tina blew it apart way back in the day,
right,
in lacrosse, and being selected on the U.S. team and then not being allowed to travel to South Africa because of apartheid back then. But way back when I was in graduate school working on my master's, I did a study among the AIW schools, and it even pronounced itself then, because not only did I focus on African American women and white women, I also looked at other minorities, Asian, Hispanic back then. And certain individuals were categorized in certain sports. And, through the plight of Title IX, certain sports tried to get rid of certain sports so they can eliminate African Americans. We need wrestling over track and field and, things of that sort.
Right, right. Well, we had a situation here that actually is in my book. I think it's 2 years ago now. The Oakland City School District, that has been a mess for years, quite frankly. I actually, in my early years when I was involved with employee assistance programs, did some work with them. They were having a budget shortfall. So what do you think they did? They cut sports. And what they did was cut a whole bunch of women's sports. And a lot of these women were young women that were going to go to college on scholarships. And it turns out, even with keeping all women's sports in, they were out of compliance for Title IX. So luckily, people jumped in and informed them, and more money came in, so that all those sports that they had eliminated, the women's sports, were put back in place. And I think that's one of the tragedies with Title IX, is that it's not monitored. And I think this whole socioeconomic thing with sports is, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to expose girls of all socioeconomic levels to different sports, and not just, find grants and ways to help them stay with sports. Because there is a very high dropout rate in age 12 to 15 at this point in time for everyone. And I think much more so in terms of the lower socioeconomic and people of color communities. And there's a guy here in Marin named Paul Austin, who has a program called Play Fair. And I mention this because the concept is beautiful, because he wants to get kids playing together at young ages from all backgrounds, so that they get used to being together and being equal, and nobody's superior to them. And then if once somebody's a little less off, another one helps them out, so that they're all working together on common playing ground, so that in the future it just is natural for them to not even think about as being above or below or whatever anyone else. You know, and I think in so many ways, in certain sports, African Americans are far superior to us in terms of some of the talents they have. You know, look at the WNBA. I mean, it's incredible. And then we've got the politics that come into it, of course. That is very disappointing. Particularly, I'm trying to remember, is it Georgia? Well, Kelly Loeffler is. Tina, do you remember what state? She's an owner of one of the NBA teams.
Yes, WNBA team.
And has decided she's anti-black. And I love it that her team is going out there with shirts that say Black Lives Matter, and that they're standing their ground. And I really hope sorry, politics comes into everything, doesn't it? I really hope she gets voted out, because she totally changed her opinion when she got put into the Senate, I believe it was, and betrayed her whole team.
Well, that points out a couple of things. You know, to even take it further, look at the impact COVID-19 is going to have on the future of sport and the opportunities for women to be able to participate in sport. And I think also Bill Rhoden, the former writer of the New York Times, he points out too, we're talking about, look who owns these teams. How many African American women own the teams? How many African American women are on the boards, or women of color, period? And so we're getting at, to me, where the meat meets the rogue, the bone.
Mm-hmm.
And the analysis of the analogy of that is, I've heard men of color talk about that,
mm-hmm.
but women of color needs to be at the table also. Yeah. And it is where the money is and the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're in for some very turbulent times coming up in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
do we have any Q&A yet?
Anybody have any questions? We're here to answer.
Right.
Well, I think we have a whole change in, I think what you've brought up, Alpha, we've had such a huge change in sports and how they're going to be, and when they're ever even going to be played again. Because, you know, as I mentioned, at here in California, where they're trying to be, and my county, or Santa Clara County, where San Jose State is, was hit very hard with COVID very early. So we closed early March. I went to Zoom, teaching on Zoom, and how the campus has been closed ever since, and they keep delaying putting sports back in, and it just leaves all these athletes, all these female athletes, kind of in limbo, and it concerns me for them, quite frankly, because so many of them are people of color, that are of women of color, I should say, who, you know, thank God they had another avenue to go to college besides just academics. But I think for the next year, at a minimum, things are going to be very different in terms of sports and the sporting world. And I think that what disturbs me is the people that don't take it serious. and don't wear masks. And I mean, my husband had COVID and was in the hospital and came home and was sicker than a dog for 6 or 7 weeks. And he's recovered, but people need to take the situation so serious. And so it's in doing sports, you've got to work around a lot of obstacles. And so I think it's going to be different for quite a while with sports, which is sad. But that we're really needing to work on some of these things. Now's the time to work on some of these things in terms of building greater equality for women in sports. In terms of, in my book, I talk about leadership and media and pay and politics. I worry also about the LGBTQ community, and also continuing to deal with the sexual abuse in sports that I think has the Nassar case with Larry Nassar and all the young girls. He abused both Olympians and Michigan State students. It's the tip of an iceberg for that kind of stuff. And we need to be standing up and protecting female athletes and making sure they don't have coaches that are abusing or using them. And that's the beauty. I'm so excited that you know Nancy, because I'm communicating with her a lot through all this, because she formed Team Integrity, to go after the USOC about not protecting its athletes, and now she's rallying around the NCAA athletes. And her heart is like, well, you influenced her. And your heart has always been in the right place, and so is hers, in terms of really understanding compassion and empathy and kindness, which is what we really need at this time in sports for women and otherwise. That without that, we don't, we're losing something in our society. And it needs to come back, really, to be a part of things.
Right.
And without it, we don't have full humanity.
There's a question up.
Yeah. Oh, I see. There's 2 questions I see.
Right. The first question is, we answered that. Second question, do you think that big universities should be allowed to have football games during COVID? I'll start off with that.
Okay, you can start.
Here in Hillbilly, Tennessee, we're really excited right about this moment. University of Tennessee is playing their first football game at 7:30 at South Carolina. So everybody is wearing their orange and walking around today and reminiscing about last year, because everybody, that's what this culture here in Tennessee surrounds itself with, the University of Tennessee. Okay. And so it's a big day and a big second. And I'll let you take it, Joan.
Well, actually, I am a football fan, but I also, my concern is for the athletes, and that if they have games, that they shouldn't have any, they should be doing it just like the pros. That it should be televised, and they shouldn't have masses of people attending games. But with the closeness of this kind of sports, it just, like I said, concerns me. And as long as they closely monitor it, I understand that. But I'm kind of ambivalent about it, quite frankly, because it's these, we don't hear about the big groups and what actually comes out of them, like the rally that Trump did in Tulsa, Kansas. And then Herman Cain dies 6 weeks later, and nobody talks about the fact he was in a whole big group with no mask on. So I think if in football, because we have a lot of sports out here, We are watching the Niners play, which is great. But the universities out here are being very careful about that kind of thing. So it's a different, I think our culture here is pretty different because it's so much more diverse in terms of different types of sports. But California is tending to operate on a cautious side of things. So I have mixed emotions, would probably be the best way to describe it. I just would hate to see these kids, they got to play football, these kids get sick. And, you know, having lived with somebody who was really sick from it, I know how pretty terrible it can be. So, anyhow.
In the impact, futuristic impact on the individual athletes, I think the science right now doesn't know enough of the long-term effects of it. So it concerns me going forward, you know, because some athletes have tested positive and you recovered, and there's some athletes that have died, you know. And it's going to be very interesting.
Well, there was that recent example, I can't remember what school, of a football player, big guy, weighed like 330 pounds or something. And he is at school and he's, you know, practicing every day, and he starts feeling sick. He was there like a week and he was getting really sick. So his mom comes and picks him up on a Friday and he's dead the next week. This just happened. It's that kind of stuff where it concerns me. In terms of that closeness of being, I mean, and I've seen, you know, somebody firsthand about what it's like to be that sick, and it's my husband's after effect. He's been a lifelong athlete himself. He now has high blood pressure. He's never had high blood pressure in his life. And it was one of the things they said could be an after effect of COVID.
Yes.
So that, I think you raise a really important point, is we don't know enough about the disease to really see what can go. And I'd hate to see young people developing lifelong problems at a young age. That's all.
We have another question. When it comes to emergency university budget cuts, do you think that sports should be spared?
Well, I do. Because I think sports serve an incredibly important purpose for not just the kids who play, but the people who love the sports, that follow the sports. I think sports teaches kids discipline, structure, responsibility, you know, all these incredibly important values that they need to have in life to succeed. So I don't really believe that sports should be cut, because I think, you know, they have to be different now. We all have to be different now. But sports play an important role in colleges. I mean, look at what you just said yourself, Alpha, about, you know, Tennessee and University of Tennessee playing is a big deal for everyone in the town, you know, and you don't want to take that away.
That also raises additional questions in front of the streaming of the dollars, you know, speculation, quote unquote, that football funds the rest of the sports at the universities.
Right.
You know, I pose, and I tend to try to look in the future, what other alternative funding sources? And I'm particularly, I'm monitoring that to go down for the youth sports, the younger kids, because there's valuable lessons, as you know, that are taught out of experience of being in sport. You learn how to lose, you learn how to win, you learn how to hopefully control your anger, you know, a lot of things that young people learn that carries on for the rest of your life. They know how to be a leader. They know how to work as a team. What is a team? You know, those types of things. So maybe there's another alternative model in terms of streaming that will come out of this. You know, my mother always said, look, if it looks bad, look for something good to come out.
Right.
And so that's, you know, I mean, there's questions and there's always speculation that, oh, since football, we don't have the dollars, things are going to be cut. Well, you know, let's look at it this a different way and see how women's sports can be supported through the financial end and with the financial loss that's occurring in this company.
Right. And what opportunity, you know, from when things change and they don't go our way, we have opportunities to learn from them and not wallow in complaining about them, but what can we learn? What can be different? And I think that's really important. It's an important piece to learn in life, I think.
We got another question. What do you think is an effective way to get more people, especially men, interested in watching professional women's sports?
Well, actually, the interesting thing is there's more men interested in than you'd be surprised, because Nielsen did a study looking at sports fans, both men and women, in, 8 different countries, which included England, France, Germany, New Zealand, Australia, United States, and a couple others. And in that study, they found that the men had a lot of interest in women's sports. And lately, I've even heard several men mention that they like to watch women's soccer a lot better than they like to watch men's soccer, for instance. I think we have to really communicate. Both men and women who support women's sports have to really communicate in a way that encourages people to watch and encourages people to tune into the WNBA and encourages people to watch. I mean, look at the World Cup soccer, not the last one, but the one before we won, the Americans won. The final game was the most watched soccer game in the United States ever, and its attendance equaled NBA finals in terms of watching those games. And yet we don't, that's the kind of thing with the media does not emphasize. They don't like really play it up. And we need to put more women's sports on TV. I mean, you know, on our normal channels, I mean, the only sport that you really generally see on standard TV is women's golf. That's it. You know, the WNBA is on another channel. It's not on, you know, one of the 3 or 4 major channels. It's not on ABC, CBS, or NBC. We need to get sports, and we need to get sportscasters talking about women's sports, I think, a lot more. And when men are listening, quite frankly, there's a sportscaster here in the Bay Area, Vernon Glenn, who happens to be an African-American man that I knew. He and I live in the same town. And he started reporting more on women's sports. So I just encouraged him, and whenever something comes on, I thank him. And we need more sportscasters, and we need sports departments that would be open to that kind of thing. So it's like at all levels, I think, do we need, and we need to get men interested in investing in women's sports. That's the tricky part. These guys, a lot of these, I hate to say it, the old white guys, they'd rather invest in a minority team that's going to lose money than in a women's team. Now, how stupid is that? I mean, really.
Well, I have a couple of things to say on this. Okay. One word, Kobe Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way in terms of involvement and the interest he took.
Yeah.
And even way years before that, I when I attended graduate school at Temple University, Tina Salone Green's husband, Frank Green, has always been, Nikki Frank's husband, has always been big supporters in supporting Black Women's Sports Foundation. And those men really work side by side with us to see reality occur. So I think a lot of athletes in these days and time, and take an example, they have daughters and they're very much interested in seeing their daughters succeed. And so that is going to draw a lot. And then, you know, with the death of the Supreme Court Justice, maybe somebody needs to take a look at how she defended some of those cases. She was extremely effective of bringing men to her side. And so I think that's worth investigating, really looking for it. But Kobe Bryant, to me, is one of the major impacts that was going to and still will, in other ways, bring interest of men being involved with WNBA.
Right.
And it should be vice versa, women involved with the NBA.
Well, I think it's getting people to think, and more, particularly men with daughters, to think more like sports is a girls thing and a boys thing. It's not just and the problem is that we still have in this country 89% of major sports editors are white males. And that, if we don't, those kinds of things we have to go after to change, because then we only get one perspective. You know, we used to have before COVID hit here in Marin, there was a girl prep of the week and a guy prep of the week, and there was more written in that sports section about women's sports periodically. And now I guess they have a new editor who is only 90% or 95% of the time only speaking about men. And we need sports editors also to make it a positive thing. You know, one of the things I talked about with Dave Barry is he just doesn't understand why there's so much negativity. It's like when the national women's soccer team in that first game, when they scored a bunch of goals as a strategy to draw attention to themselves and make a difference, everybody jumped on the bandwagon and you know, criticized them and said, why are you doing that? You're not being ladylike. You're not being respectful. Let's face it, Alpha, you and I know if the same thing had been a men's team, nobody would have said a goddamn, excuse my language, nobody would have said a darn word about their antics, about their celebrating goals. So, sorry, I got a little carried away.
Well, we do have another question.
Okay.
How do we involve more minority youth in a wide range of sports when so much emphasis is now on private clubs and more of a pay-to-play model?
Well, I think we need more programs like the Black Women's Sports Foundation programs need to be around the country, first of all. I think we need to have, one of the things that struck me is we need to have more mentorship programs for African American and other people, Latina and other people of color, girls. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do here, and Alpha has graciously agreed to be one of my advisory board, is I'm trying to start a program, I'm working to start a program that would be a sports mentorship program for African American and Latina girls in a pretty predominantly white county. And yet there's so much buy-in for this program, I'm not really worried about it being able to go. But we need these to be all over the place. And I was speaking to a woman who in a program up in Seattle, and I was trying to find out about the structure of her program. And she never told me her structure, but then she had all these questions to ask me about diversity because they didn't understand anything about diversity. And I just thought, you know, that's not an exchange. I want to talk to people who are willing to exchange information, because that's one of the things we need to do too, to get and find more grant money going forward to support those kinds of programs, and more people willing to step up and support those kinds of programs who have the ability to do so. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I want to point to a couple of success programs that I personally have been involved with. The Black Women Sports Foundation, and you can get them. They're based, they have a web page, and it's out of Philadelphia. But also Peter Westbrook Foundation out of New York, which he was Olympic fencer. And in fact, when he began the program, he didn't even want to start the program. And I encouraged him to start his own foundation. And he was able to incorporate support from the national governing body of fencing. But now, working with the kids in Harlem and teaching them fencing, probably, I think more than half of the USA Olympic fencing team is from Peter's program. And last but not least, another example to take a look at is Wendy Hilliard, the rhythmic gymnastic program that she has in New York, and has very successfully expanded a second city, Detroit. She has a program now in Detroit where she originally grew up. And she has thousands of kids. The national governing body, I know, have supported her, but also in terms of corporate government monies and things of that sort. Kids need to be exposed at an early age. And one of the things I think what we were thinking about when we initially designed the Black Women Sports Foundation, we wanted to introduce kids to non-traditional sports. And that's where my heart was into it to do. Forget non-traditional sports. What was sports? When I came from high school, we didn't have girls' sports in my high school. I played the clarinet in the band. So when I landed on the College of Wooster campus and they had 13 sports for women, I was like, wow. And never had touched the basketball, knew nothing about it. But I was determined I wanted to play basketball because I love basketball. But anyhow, those are some of the three male programs: Black Women Sports Foundation, Peter Westbrook Foundation, and the Wendy Hilliard Gymnastic Program are 3 very strong programs that I would have anybody take a look at and look at their website and talk with them.
Yeah. Well, I have spoken with Wendy Hilliard. You know, she's in the book, and she's very excited, very inclusive, happy to have a conversation. So is Peter, though. He's pretty hilarious. You just call him up. Oh, if I have time, I'll talk to you. Oh, don't have time, but call me back, you know. So he's very approachable. And thanks to Alpha, I was able to get both of their contact information and talk to them. I have Alpha to thank for that. Then I have Carol Oglesby to thank for connecting me to Alpha. And the book, I want to read this one thing because I wrote a poem to Carol at the beginning of the book, because Carol to me was the ultimate sports psychologist. She supported and encouraged everyone, and I think she was very helpful, particularly with African American women in terms of, and still is, encouraging them in sports. But I consider her the grandmother of sports psychology. Dr. Carol Oglesby, guide and mentor to thousands of girls and women in sport, sharing her hand with black and white. Her kind and generous heart, willingness to friend and befriend those others, neglected, whose backs were turned on, to recognize beyond our borders the need for outreach to our global neighbors. Our gratefulness knows no bounds. And my book is dedicated to her. But I think more, I think more people need to step back, quite frankly, Alpha, and read and understand the depth of the struggle for Black lives, and understand how easy people like myself have had it compared to so many other people. And, you know, and we should be stepping up, more of us, to support Black Lives Matter and doing the things that really count. I wrote a recent column, a letter to the editor at our local paper that was published this week about, you know, the 400 years of abuse and the need for us to like interact and read articles and movies and really take back time to understand and support African Americans in general, and particularly in sport, and particularly African American women, who I think have gotten the short shrift. So I think, do we have another question? It looks like.
I don't think so.
Hi.
Oh, we do have one. We have one more question to answer, if that's okay. How do we involve more minority youth in a wide range of sports when so much emphasis? Oh, we just did that one. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for coming. Do you have any last words to the audience?
Alpha?
Well, for me, I just want to say another scholar athlete is Arthur Ashe, and how he sacrificed and gave back to the community. And then last but not least, please go out and vote.
Absolutely. Joan, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I think people really need to examine their attitudes towards girls and women in sport and learn to support them. And I want to second Alpha's second, which is please, everyone who can, go out and let your voice be heard and vote.
And that's a wrap for our presentation. Thank you so much to our guests and to everyone who tuned in this evening. We greatly appreciate everyone's time and support of independent bookstores. Purchase a copy of Stand Up by clicking the green button at the bottom of your screen. We're also accepting donations on our website. If you'd like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.